All right, welcome. My name is Gabe Flores, and I'll be speaking today about a couple of items not in the room, which so we'll be kind of speaking a little bit later on in the talk about why they aren't present and sort of what that means for them to be absent. I'm just going to give, before I get started, maybe I'll just introduce one of the baskets that we're going to be talking about. This basket's from 1990. The materials are sedgeroot, redbud, bracken fern, and stone beads. It's from the Elizabeth Cole Butler collection, and it's from 1900. I think what I'll do is, before I get into the descriptions, I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself. When I was thinking about the talk, the Portland Art Museum allows you to speak about anything in the collection. Or I guess it should be anything that's visible, but I went with anything in the collection. And how I decided on what I'd speak about, I don't have an arts background. My background for education is political science, history, sociology, and psychology. And so I often think like, oh, what is it that I'm most connected to in a space? And so my field is primarily more relational aesthetics, more like contemporary practices, and some performance and installation. And so I immediately went to the wings that kind of have more of those types of works. And as I was walking around, I remembered oh, that's right. There was I've been into this space and I've seen a couple of the Yokuts baskets of the Tule River, even though they're not present currently. And I was thinking that's part of my heritage. And I started thinking about why is it that I don't know more about that side of my family? And so another little layer for me. Part of my heritage is I'm third generation Jehovah's Witness, and it's really interesting to me thinking about why is it that we don't know especially in the States, how parts of our spiritual heritage has been extracted and denied. And for me, that would be a large part. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, I wasn't allowed to, and those around us weren't allowed to really investigate other types of spirituality or types of cultures that would reference a different sort of spiritual sort of belongingness. And because the indigenous objects or indigenous festivals often aren't just culture separate from spirituality, since they're coalesced, that means that on my native side, we didn't go to powwows, we didn't go to any of the religious celebrations, and then on my Mexican and Latino side, we never went to quinceañeras or never were allowed to do piñatas or just some basic things that would be considered just culturally relevant to a story. So my approach was wondering what does an artifact mean to me, since it's been kind of part of a heritage, but something that I've been denied. So I decided to really start thinking about one relative, my grandma Della Lamont, and thinking about what her side of the family really means. She's part Yokuts of the Tule River, which is the tribe that we're from down in, it's between Fresno and Bakersfield, and just outside of a small town called Porterville. You might have heard about Porterville more recently in the last few years. All that in the Tulare County area, they're suffering some of the most major droughts right now. And so there's been tons of pieces this last summer. There were a couple of pieces in the New York Times about having to ship water in, or having to have water donated for showers, washing of clothes, or not really washing of clothes. You would have to go to a laundromat someplace. But having what that means for groups in that area when they start thinking about their location, because with native or indigenous objects, you can't help but think about the location that they're from because they're from the surrounding areas. I mean, it's sedgeroot that's grown from that area. It's the bracken fern root, and then the red bud, at least in this basket. That you start wondering about what is the connection to the space, to the story, and to the artifacts themselves. This is inside of the basket. The baskets themselves are made in a coiled fashion. So they take often there's like a deer grass that they use as the base, and then they do a stitching of the sedge in order to make a long coil. And then about each inch, and this is about 2.75 tall by 9 inch in diameter, each inch is roughly 50 stitches. It's just really long and laborious work. Here is one. This is the other basket I'm going to be focusing on. This is a cooking basket from the 1870s. This is, and then in the previous basket, I should probably just mention what some of the things kind of note to. Kind of having the people there points to community. When I had asked someone at the tribe what the basket like connected to them, it was like, oh yeah, the ideas of community, and then possibly a water snake or a lightning bolt, and then also a reference to the church, which would be relevant in 1900. In the, oops, going the wrong way. In the cooking basket, this is a rattlesnake print, and then also reference also to the church. It's hard to know with crosses whether or not they were made for more of a marketplace, like if they're trying to sell the wares to folks that would be recently in the area, or if it was because of the internalizing of the Christian message. It's really hard to know the intent of what the basket really is saying for the individuals. This is an inside of the basket. It was interesting how I ended up, I guess I'll kind of back up a little bit. When I first decided that I'd be speaking about the baskets, I was really wondering what is it that a basket means? Like when I come into this space, as opposed to maybe one of the contemporary art spaces in the museum, what am I getting out of that object? In here, when I walk in, I mean, it's so somber. Everything is very dim light. It kind of makes you, forces a contemplation. And it was just interesting wondering like, oh, what does that mean for us to be wanting that when we see objects that hold a different sort of story and not being unaware what the stories are. So there's different versions of why the rattlesnake would be in cooking bowls or in different artifacts. And the rattlesnake, there's different legends depending on which Yokuts band you're from. So there's 60 different bands or tribelets with 60 different dialects, and it's all throughout the San Joaquin Valley. So depending on where you're located, the story shifts slightly. But often the rattlesnake is like one of the stories that I heard for the rattlesnake is the reason why it has a rattle is because it was being dishonest, and people were getting Yokuts were getting sick from the rattlesnake, and because the dishonesty of the rattlesnake, the creator made it so that way the rattlesnake always had to announce that he was coming. Other stories that I heard from just accounts of like what a rattlesnake imprint would mean would be the going out and gathering materials, whether it was berries or other materials in the woods or in that area. By having the rattlesnake imprint, you're kind of announcing yourself to the rattlesnake, so that way the rattlesnake just kind of sees you. It's like as one of their own, almost like a camouflage. The Lamont School. So when I think about my Native heritage, I can't not think about my French heritage as well. My grandma, Delle Lamont, who's the grandparent I'm speaking somewhat to today, she has both French and Yokuts. The Lamont School was built in 1890, and it was established by my great-great-grandfather, William Lamont. His son, Henry Lamont, is my grandmother's father, and my grandmother's mother is on our native side, and that's Elohia. Elohia Lamont. And this is in Tulare County Historical Museum at Mooney's Grove in Visalia. And often whenever I go down there to visit, we're with family, and so we almost always go and get a photo in front of the Lamont School. And I think why I'm even bringing up the Lamont School when I'm thinking about the baskets is I often wonder, why is it that we would visit the Lamont School and never really the tribe? Or that was, and I think because the way that Jehovah's Witnesses structure the belief that education is okay to nod to as long as it's extracted away from anything spiritually and culturally significant. And so it's kind of interesting to me, just like wondering what the meaning of like desiring one side of a family versus the other. There's also a position of power in there that I can't help deny. Like by having a school, it seems as if that's like a good thing. I imagine there's some different forms of pedagogy and like the internalizing of the message, and I forget about the damning structure of education also. And the social control that education kind of automatically implies. So the Tulare County Historical Museum houses one of the largest collections of Yokut's baskets. And so whenever we go there, it's always interesting because we get to go in, and this is the entryway. And when I say we, it's usually my mom, and then her partner Jerry, and then any other family members that are along for the ride. And whenever we go, it's interesting to be able to see such a variety of the baskets, but also how it is that they're framed in that space. The descriptors, for the most part, only show who they're donated by. It doesn't really speak about anything about the artistry, about the band or the tribelet that it would be a part of. It's really from like who it is that is bequeathing something to the tribe, or to the museum. Sorry. This is one of the images that it's a reenactment that is in the Tulare County Museum. Here's another reenactment. And the information just simply says reenactment. This is Mrs. Chappell. These are the baskets she made. This is just listed as an unidentified person. So the Tulare County Museum has, it's kind of the agricultural and sort of like natural history museum as well of that area. This is one of the newer areas, and it's really dealing with the agriculture, and the down below is an exhibition which talks about recent immigrants, or not recent, but like immigrants from about 1840 to the present for the Tulare County area. When I was here, I decided to go upstairs and just kind of look at the photos. It's funny, like when you put on just the hat, like you're researching, everything becomes like important, and so you just want to make sure you're looking at everything. And so as I was walking up there, walking around, the same thing was true. All you would see is just donated by on all the images. I ended up finding this photo amongst the photos. I had come across 4 photos, and it said donated by William and Charlotte Lamont, who's my great uncle, who's my grandma's brother. And it was funny, I ended up taking just photos of the photo, and then later I went, when we were hanging out at my Uncle Martin's house, Uncle Kiko, he and my mom were like, hey, that's your grandma right there. that's your grandma, like she's like probably like 7, and that's your great grandpa Henry. And it was just funny just thinking about like the baskets in the sharing the same space as the Lamont School, and then having the like relatives present, like the closest relatives present, but then also like they're invisible. And then everyone else that's in the museum is invisible. All you really get to know are who donated the things. So as I was kind of finding more things in the in researching what the baskets meant and the connection to my own family. I connected with somebody over at Porterville College, which is a 2-year college there in Porterville. And they had, his name is Richard Osborne, and he was so incredibly helpful. He's an anthropologist there, just recently retired. And he started this anthropology library that has just a lot of resources for, I'm talking about the prehistory of the San Joaquin Valley. There were a couple of really interesting pieces. The one that I'm going to show you in a minute is a short video. It's about 3 minutes long. The quality is kind of poor because it was filmed in 1981 on VHS. And it talks about it has a basket maker, Beatrice Wilcox Aransas, who is, at the time of the filming, she's 73. And it kind of has her describing the process of the making, and then also like how things are harvested. Why I find that to be really interesting is because it makes it so, like, in order to make a basket, you really need to know the environment that it comes from, because there are certain times of year to harvest something, a certain method of be able to get the most material out of it, and it just shows a connection and a knowingness of the area that they're from. And so I'm just going to play just a short clip of Beatrice kind of making a basket.
Redbud, we call it redbud, and it's just like redbud. You know what redbud is. You can see it up in the mountain, and they pick out the good ones, like real new shoots, sharp. They split it with a knife, and then if you got a good teeth, they always have to bite it, you know, and make it into a shape like this here. And they work it down with their fingers, each what do you call it? And then they hang it outside when it's cold, and the cold makes it real red, like the way it is. And they use it later on, maybe in about a year past. But the red one, you pick that too while the leaf is falling. See, when it ain't got no more leaves up in the mountain somewhere. And but if you pick it when it has the leaves already, you know, and if you try to use it, you know, it'll peel. See, it peels. The color. The color will peel when you try to trim it with knife or soak it in water.
What time of year?
Well, I don't know. I think right now maybe it's budding, maybe it's got leaves already, so it's not good to pick it. It's
Would you get the willow?
And the willow's all right. You can get that any time, but this one is the main thing. You can't. No.
Besides the mud you spoke of?
Oh yeah, I think my mother-in-law used that rusty can. And it seems like
Any other ways besides the rusty can?
And no, I don't think so. No, I seen my mother-in-law get a walnut peeling. We used to work in the walnut all the time, you know. You know, the peeling of the green walnut. That really made it really good black, like this one here. Of course, you know how it is. If you touch it, it really gets your fingers black.
The old people, a long time ago, did you ever hear how they colored it before they had any walnuts or rusty cans?
Well, that's like I said, they used to get that mud, the one that spring running out in the mountain sometimes, and it looks greasy. And they get that mud and they put this in there, and that's what makes it black.
So it was really interesting, just like these little things. I know, sometimes things just feel like really interesting to me. When I was finding information about just the baskets and trying to find possibly an elder speaking about them, like beyond like the like currently at the tribe. I came across Beatrice Wilcox Aransas. The Wilcox family was the family that had donated the Lamont School to the Tulare County Historical Museum, and I just thought that was like an interesting connection. And then I just kind of was very curious about, just a little curious about Beatrice, and so we were. Being at the anthropology section or their library at Porterville College, it was interesting. They didn't have a date on the video, and so I thought I would just find out if I can find an obituary or any information on Beatrice so that I can get a date on it. I ended up finding a book that this photo was published in on first families of sort of natives from the California area, and she was listed in the as someone. This is her, like in her. This is taken in the 1930s, so she's in her mid-20s, and it mentions in the little caption that even when she was picking oranges in the fields, that she always liked to be well dressed, have her hair coiffed, and always had nice shoes on. And I thought that was just interesting, just in like the artists that I know now that I'm around, that there's like this, sometimes there's this, not always, but sometimes there's this incredible attention to detail just in their own persons. So this is the, let me just get back. All right, so when I was thinking a bit about what the baskets mean, I couldn't help but think about the environment that they come from, because that's how so many spiritual and culturally relevant objects and practices come for Indigenous folks. And so I started wondering about, like, outside of East Porterville, where they're shipping water in and they're suffering from extreme drought, the 9 cities with the worst drought conditions currently in the U.S. are all either in the Central Valley or the San Joaquin Valley. So the Central Valley is just right above the San Joaquin Valley. So, and they're all at extreme drought right now. So what that means is that, like, not only for the tribe, but everybody else in that area, water rights are probably one of the most important conversations happening at the moment. How water rights in California are, how they're honored is who is using the material, who was using water first. And so, like, the tribes themselves are protected, but often it goes to farmers that had started their agricultural practices fairly early on in that area. And also, like, once someone has an agricultural practice, then they can also start diversifying the sorts of things that they end up growing. So sometimes it's these higher commodity sort of trees and plants that they end up going for. So it's usually nuts, almonds, pistachios, or it's like some of the others, which would be like tomatoes and those sorts that end up taking a little bit more water. So the inheritance of water rights, I don't know, I just started thinking about, like, how it is that our systems end up mimicking the theories that kind of are of that time. So I started thinking about John Locke's second treatise of government, and which is the document that tells us, like, oh no, we all come to this as a blank slate. It's a tabula rasa, and it's the foundation of us and how we think of manifest destiny. It comes down to the use value. So during the time of the writing, there were a lot of structural things happening throughout Europe. And so what John Locke was saying is that, well, there's always America. You can always go there and start anew. There's always a new spot. And so it's the foundational document for manifest destiny. So when we started thinking about the use value and what's important for a space, often we think about what we can extract from it. Use value can also be, how do we honor that space? How do we hold on to it if it's so valuable? So this is the Tule River over in Porterville, which is the primary river for the reservation. Because it's all the same aqueduct, it doesn't matter if you're several miles away growing almonds or if you're closer in. The water is all shared, really. So the reason why the baskets aren't here, portion of it, the Elizabeth Cole Butler collection was donated over the course of 1987 to 2004, where she had entrusted the museum with the collection. There's no record of the baskets, either of the baskets being shown since 1998. And that I find really interesting for just tons of reasons. And there's over 2,000 pieces in that collection itself. Obviously, there's not space in this area to be able to show that many. But at what point is it useful for something to be just simply stored, especially when there's a lived history with these items? And then it makes you wonder, like, oh, how were these items acquired to begin with? In her collection, there's like tales of some things coming from garage sales, some things being found from other native-based antiquity dealers, and how much do we wonder where how those items are acquired? When I was talking to a couple of people at the tribe, they were telling stories about how when they were forcibly removed, that anything that were their property were just kind of taken, and they were just salvaged by ill hands. And what rights do nations have to the objects that mean the most to them? When I think about like the cooking basket, this isn't the cooking basket, this is more of just like a holding basket. But with a cooking basket, the baskets are so structurally strong that you can cook inside them. And so you can boil water, you can often you would make mush, which is acorns, which is the primary supplement for folks up on, especially at the time, on the reservation. And so you would kind of mash up the acorns and then go through the process of leaching, and then you would boil it. And how you would boil it is you'd get hot rocks and then place them in there, and then would slowly cook it. And that's, to me, just incredible to be able to have that much history and sort of a shared piece that's very communal. I mean, to share a meal with somebody is to pause, and it's to kind of offer them another way to survive. It's like that daily survival that we all have. And for a cooking basket to be hidden in a vault somewhere feels questionable to me. It makes me wonder, like, if I'm feeling that way just about a couple of pieces, the ones that I'm most connected to, I'm guessing others that are connected to the other nations probably have a similar feeling. To have something encased and to have it kind of displaced at the same time. Often with museums, it's like you get a little snapshot of how things used to be, and then we get to congratulate ourselves for how they are now. Like, oh gosh, I'm so glad that I didn't have to eat mush out of a basket, or whatever it is that we want to tell ourselves that the way of doing things now is probably the most beneficial. And so it just makes you wonder about how it is that museums hold the stories, and why are we asking them to do so as the most trustworthy source for that? I would wonder if there are like more beneficial ways to be able to have the care of the objects. That way they can communicate to the folks that it most resonates with. So recently, just this last year in August, there was an article that was in the Oregonian about the museum returning crow medicine bundles. There had been 18 that had been sold between 1970 and 1990 to Eugene Cole Butler. And the medicine bundles were donated, and there was nothing kind of ill in the acquisition of it. But and also in 1990, the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act had an inventory of what was the collections of the U.S. tribes, and they had contacted the Crow Nation in 1993, and the Crow Nation had said that they weren't significant enough. After, a few years ago, there was another artifacts examiner that decided that they were important to the culture of the Crow folks. And so the repatriation had occurred. And I think I kind of like that. I mean, I like that a lot, because you wonder like how is it that something holds a meeting of people, is a medicine bundle which is kind of significant for an individual within the tribe, at least for the Crow folks. That it's significant, especially in their death practices. I would say that a lot of the objects are inherently important to somebody's spirituality because of how it ends up feeding folks. It connects you to the space that you're from, especially like knowing that bracken fern root is from the hill just up the way, or that your ancestors had to know how to get that rose, get the red bud off the tree in order to be able to make the baskets. Like those things become just inherently important to a community when the artifacts or the objects are connected to the story of the people. So I started like wondering about just my own personal framework about how I've thought about my native side, and I think I've always just thought of it as like, oh yeah, that's proto-socialism, and I just kind of put it to the side. And then I don't know, I started thinking about like what it means to really be proto-socialist. And so I was thinking about like Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes' work in, 1661, and how he's responding out of it's like a fear of war. And so he thinks that if we leave order to ourselves just as people, that our lives are going to end up being nasty, brutish, and short. And that we are all going to be fitting for ourselves. We come up and we pop up just like mushrooms. There's no order to it. And so we need to protect ourselves, hence a monarchy. A few years later, Samuel von Pufendorf, real name, he ends up writing On the Duty of Man and Citizen. And in that text, it's really interesting because his approach is that, no, we don't inherently come from war. What we do is we inherit modes of peace. I often think about this professor that I had at PSU, Craig Carr, and he would tell stories like, oh yeah, I mean, like if you want to find out really that the importance of the individual, what you do is you create some experiment and you can just drop off a baby in the wilderness, drop off a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old in the wilderness, come back when they're like 21 and then see all the amazing things they've done. And no, you're gonna see a dead baby if you end up doing that, because we're born into families and clans. And so we're inherently having somebody look out after us. And someone, especially with native heritage, that's having, with Yokuts, it's having 4,000 years kind of looking after each other. Because what you end up doing in a clan or a family is you realize that every one of those roles you are going to at some point also occupy. So if you have a parent that's 20 years older, you're going to occupy that spot in 20 years. You want to make sure that every person is going to be taken care of because you two are going to occupy all those spots. So when I started thinking about just like what it means to call something proto-socialist, it's like, oh no, it's just calling something family. It's showing that a family has your best interest at heart. I don't know, thinking about like what my heritage often means to me and like what it means to come from the Yokuts. I just think about what their priorities are, and at least what they have been and what they currently are. And like my tribe has just helped my family so much, and any family in the tribe. And it's almost like they knew, like having someone that knows better than you, that can see into the future for you, to help you prepare for the future. When I think about like growing up as a Jehovah's Witness and having such a limitation on our education, it was only Bible literature, it was only from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and it was a lot of fear-based materials. I mean, it was like imagining a Hobbesian world. They imagine that life is going to be nasty, brutish, and short without sort of an eternal guider. But that's very individualistic. That's not really how we're born into the system at all. We're born in with other people looking out for us, just inherently. In order for you to get this big, somebody had to at least feed you and do a couple of things. Maybe it wasn't always right, but they had to do a couple of things to maybe care for your best interests. So when I think about like the things that are important to the tribe, they focus so much on education for like 0 to 18. They have an incredible scholarship program for those interested in vocational or higher education. And then they kind of support you a little bit here and there, but it's really at the very end, like once you turn 55 and then again at 62, that they increase the support. And it's interesting just wondering like what it means like in our own political structures and with our water rights, like what happens if we're just looking out for our own interests and for our time right now? Like what is it that we imagine for somebody in our same position but 30 years from now? Like how do we start envisioning sort of new possibilities and how we kind of think about our own structures? It's funny because like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote The Social Contract, he was really inspired by Pufendorf, and that's a huge part of our own contemporary sort of political thinking. So inherent even in our own systems, we get to see like either the cry for the individual or cry for more family-oriented and looking out for each other. What I think is really funny is that it took me and took the tribe really supporting like my education for me to understand that like almost like more of like a Dorothy moment that like, oh, wait a minute, that's how it's always been. Like it's kind of like you've always had it, Dorothy, you always had it. Like no, the tribe has always been that. And they've been like that for thousands of years. And for me to point to Pufendorf in like the 17th century is really limited in how I've been thinking about political spheres. I've been probably looking to the wrong knowledge base. And I think that's going to conclude the talk, and I can answer any questions or go from there.
So the photo, the car with your great-grandfather?
Yeah.
Your grandmother?
Mm-hmm.
So your grandmother's generation was the generation that went into Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah, she did. She did it at an older age.
What did you say the rattlesnake meant, or the tail?
Well, it really depends on who you end up talking to, but often it's thought that the rattlesnake is something that the creator did because the rattlesnake was acting unjustly. And so in some of the baskets, there's like these little water spiders and then quail. Water spiders are known because they can be in both worlds, and so they're often communicators. And then like having like a quail, quails are known as being sort of like they're like justice, the enactors of justice. And so there would be this communication between a rattlesnake with a water spider to a quail.
Yeah, it's just interesting with the unjust and the crosses, and if there's a symbolism of the church is unjust.
No, it's hard not to want to read that in. But I know that's just a lot of my own bias. No, go ahead.
It seems like there was an inference in your talk about who is the rightful keeper of these pieces, and is there a better way to display them that might be more righteous or more connected to maybe just anybody, and certainly the people that the art came from. I guess it's a couple of questions. Where is this art in this? Are you actively petitioning to get this art kind of out into the general public?
I don't know. I'm like for myself, this was like a point of like formulating a few questions. I think of it as like I've been looking for something to want to research for a while. And so by going down and kind of visiting the tribe and getting to know the Porterville College, trying to figure out like just a nice, respectful way to go about it as sort of an outsider. So this is just me like formulating questions so far. And really, because like for me, I'm an artist really first. And so when I think about any piece, it's like, oh, well, it kind of goes through me as an individual first, as a vessel. And I think that's how I wanted the pieces just to feel alive for a minute.
Well, particularly these are utilitarian first, and then they become perceived as art by somebody else later on, right?
Well, it really depends. I mean, like, what is utility? Because I would wonder, like, having any sort of symbols attached to something makes it have a more complex message. So I wouldn't know if I would just like reduce it to utility or not. Oh, did you have?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, excuse me, what the state of the craft is today. Like, how many practitioners are there? Like, and that's like the first question. Like, who's doing it now? Who knows how to do it? Is it being lost? And the second question is, you also talked about water. I mean, then you talked about the materials coming from the environment. Is that affecting the practitioner's ability to get materials?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, for the first portion, it was really interesting going to the tribe and meeting with the cultural director. I got to meet somebody who's a cousin of mine who's currently teaching the language. And so like this process of trying to keep it going is there, at least with the language and then also with the basket making. So there's elders that meet that have like a special place. And so there's a lot of basket making that happens there. And then also trying to get folks interested who are like a younger generation. So there's like contemporary practices as well. What was interesting about like the contemporary practices is that sometimes it's more comes down to a personal preference versus like what the rattlesnake really means for, I don't know, for that basket. Because now there isn't really the utility there. There's no reason to make a cooking basket to make mush. So now it has like this elevated feel to it because it's never really utilized. It ends up feeling much more.
Now they're making art.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's like specifically art. Yeah, totally. And then the second part. Well, when I was talking to Sean Gonzalez up at the reservation, she was mentioning that what happens with the materials is that the roots of the sedge root end up growing more compacted. So how that they've been harvesting, because it's kind of like any sort of cultivation. You prune in a specific way to get a certain type of growth. You're used to a certain sort of water source, which is going to make sort of an elongated like root system to be able to utilize, and it's changing the structure of how it is that the materials are gathered.
Could I just ask you about your practice in terms of presentation, which was you chose to talk about two baskets that aren't physically here, and so we watched a TV screen, but we're actually in a room that's filled with gorgeous baskets, and your ethos seemed to be that use was the highest criterion, and that we should use these living artifacts to make them be living. But you didn't talk about a single one that was actually in the room. So we're not making use of anything, and we could have actually watched that in any room. So I'm curious then about your choices, what
Sure.
the relationship between, like we're in a relationship to a space too, which we're not using. So what was it you wanted us to take away?
I'm not sure of anything specific, but I think I thought it was a nice way to see where the placeholder would have gone. To be able to see the context in the room where if the baskets had been invited to be present.
So you're kind of imagining that they're this sort of like
I think in order,
case, that this would be like a case.
well, wondering what it means for something to be absent and the importance of that. Because they're present, they're in the collection. But we don't, they're in this building, we just don't have access to them. So like that's why. Trying to see what it means to present something when it's absent, when there are other curatorial decisions being made about what's present. And I think just highlighting the role of curation and gatekeeping.
Any other questions?
I have another question.
I don't mind. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, okay, so there's lots of different ways of using a museum. I mean, this museum covers a very large span of time. In more recent acquisitions, the people who made those acquisitions, they want to be in the museum. You You know, like that's the goal, to be in a museum. And you're talking about these artifacts that are in the museum that wasn't ever their intent to be in a museum, and the people who are most connected to them don't really want them to be in a museum. Can you talk about that tension, or have you thought about that tension?
Yeah, I guess I kind of wonder sometimes about intent and how things end up being acquired, and what responsibility do we have in our public entities to house things that have been possibly gotten by ill gains. What does that say about us as a community, as folks that allow for nonprofits to be able to participate in that way? And who is it that says something if it isn't the way that it should be? Like currently, there isn't in the acquisition of objects, you don't have to contact the tribe. Like the museum doesn't have a legal obligation to contact the tribe. So what does that say about like housing something, but not even the people that would probably most benefit from knowing that it's there, to be able to give more information? What was fascinating about looking at like the Tulare County Museum, they had like no information, and they are right there next to the people that made the baskets. They could invite those folks to come in and give as much information to give a real lived history. What is amazing about the Portland Art Museum is their desire to want to put contemporary art practices with those that have more of a historical yield to it. So like around the corner, there's more of a contemporary piece that's from 2011, and just different other intersections like that. I don't know if that is enough, though, to allow sort of ill-gotten means to be so present. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's got to be a lot more we can talk about with this. So
yeah.
I can't leave yet. Now, there's so many interesting things that you brought up, just teasing us, it feels like. You know, in the beginning of your talk, you said something about how you work in relational ways, performance and installation, curatorial, community-based, right? You know, and you went to the areas of the museum where there are relational practices. So could you talk more about what you mean by that? I have ideas, but I don't think you mean there's like social practice wing or something.
No. I think things that just point more to contemporary practices. I think that's to contemporary practices.
Oh, okay. So you don't mean this particular area?
No, I think no.
I thought maybe you did. Like
not
your
often.
Are meant to be in relation with a context and a community and so on. You know. But...
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. When I think about like relational aesthetics, I think more in contemporary practices.
Okay.
And where that has been. Although we can easily go down that. I mean.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I was wondering if you were trying to resituate the work that we're around right now, which would make sense, and other people have done, as that kind of practice. Yeah. The way you're doing with looking at different knowledge systems and saying like, wait, there's this one that's eons old that I should be looking to, but has not been contextualized as a like socialism theory or political theory the way these other European thinkers have been in, kind of move I thought you were pulling.
Well, in a way, maybe a little bit, like because it is, if it's lived, then it's contemporary, just inherently. So, but I don't know if I would like take everyone else with me on that.
Okay.
To describe all of these as being relational, although inherently they are relational pieces.
Did you
Oh, yeah.
Oh, super.
Go ahead.
All those wonderful objects from the Middle East have not been taken by the British and put in the British Museum, they wouldn't exist today. Right? They would be destroyed because the people who are currently living there have no appreciation for them. Think they're against religion. So
I think from like I can't really speak from that perspective, but I can speak maybe a little bit closer to what these might mean to a tribe that I'm aware of. And after speaking to several folks, and like they wonder why it is, like the one thing that that people would ask is like, why are you talking about baskets and why are you talking about Yokuts baskets in Portland? Like, why is that conversation happening up there? Like, how did they get up there? And those are the questions people have. It's like, how did they get up there? So it's almost the traverse of what you're suggesting. There's an immense amount of care in where these family artifacts and family heirlooms end up. And so there is, I can't really speak to folks that are like in a different sort of outlook, but I can speak to them that they're wondering about, like, why is it that they're not even being seen? Like, why are they hidden away? We would love to be able to get connected with that.
I guess something that I really appreciate about what we've kind of been over so far is this kind of like tension between the different kind of like cultural use values that can be found in an object like a basket, whether it's like in, the more like sort of traditional use sense of like touching acorns or like displaying as part of a collection. And I can see that tension in the basket itself, in the process, that are kind of a strange element in there. And I wonder if you can talk about like the hybridity of like the object itself and how it kind of already from 1870 on bears these like marks of colonization.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest is once you have colonization, there's a response to this other thing, which is no longer this insular sort of response. So it's hard to tell what intention is when you look at something when there are now external sort of touchstones. And what that means for like contemporary practices is, and especially with any sort of technology, that it's technology it shifts how we make stuff. And it shifts sort of like the use of it. So instead of like needing to have a cooking basket that's gonna take hundreds of hours to make, like you can get a pot. And then you make mush that way. And so there's a lot of, yeah, you get a microwave, totally, exactly. Yeah, you rip open the packet and you put it in and then you put it in the microwave. But it's hard to, it's wild with things that have like formally have more of a use value, that have more of like a nod to like utilitarianism. Like there's something that it functions for and in helping in the day-to-day sort of maintenance of life. And then once you have an individual not needing to make it for the community anymore, you really end up seeing more of the individual in the baskets themselves. So when I was talking to folks at the tribe, I was asking like, so what is the decision making for like something that would be like a cooking basket versus something more of like a more of like a looser basket or like more of a platter, like what is the decision making in that? And it's like, I don't know, just like personal preference. Where the individual, like when I'm thinking about it as an individual, it's like, oh, well, yeah, that's the highlight now. In art, it's the highlight of the individual, not so much the group. Occasionally there's a nod in like social practice or with relational aesthetics, but it's often seeing the person as material, not really as an individual. So when I think about baskets and what it means in the making of it, like once there's an outside reference and once you start selling the baskets, because at that point they started selling baskets, that it's hard to know what that message means because it's no longer insular.
Right, so expanding on that, with this basket, do you think this basket was ever used or could it have been made to be sold? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
From the onset. So
I think that
be kind of this like strange, like today we would call it like a postmodern object.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know whether or not, like the first interaction with the Yokuts with white folks would be Spaniards in the 1770s. So there was already through the missions this connection with the cross. And so you don't know if it's someone that's internalizing the worldview or if they're responding to the worldview, creating sort of an allegory within, like especially with the use of the rattlesnake, or if it's something that was made more decoratively to be able to sell. I don't think I can know the intention of how it was constructed.
So by having us look at this basket that's not available to us in the room instead of these ones that are you saying that there is something very different perhaps about these baskets on display and this one?
No, I think I'm suggesting that it's probably all the same. That each one of these baskets come from somebody else's heritage that's not being seen.
Right. So there are differences in.
Yeah, there's inherently differences in the baskets, but like what I think pointing to is that the differences are so specific to each tribe. Like I don't know, it's often kind of weird when there's a bunch of different tribes in the same room representing like baskets without a lot of context about what the variation is.
Right. This is kind of what I'd love to hear you talk more about. Why do you think that's happening?
I think for convenience of the viewer, most likely. This is an area that you end up coming into maybe for a certain feeling. You come in and there's like an acknowledgement to a time before. There's maybe this other sort of internalness about the environment and where the materials kind of come from in order to be harvested and gathered and made into the objects that we see. I think that's what this functions as often right now. I think if I was just speaking for me personally, I'm like, oh yeah, people come in here to be connected to something that is long ago. And it doesn't matter how that is framed, because we're not really spending the time to wonder what the difference of the origin stories are, nor are we provided with enough material to decipher those things out. Christine?
Well, and by highlighting the cooking bowl particularly, it's the centerpiece for care that you spoke about earlier, and about how the group would be caring for each other. And by this particular basket being hidden, it's kind of the poetic side of the onslaught of colonialism has like disrupted that sense of care. And like that's what we see. That's what's missing in the room. We see these as objects and not the relational piece. I think it's interesting that you focus on this kind of a bowl because that's the sustenance.
It's also the lens that we're looking at them through. I mean, if lots of different representatives of tribes came in here, they probably would see these as all very different things. You know, through a different lens.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
And I guess they specifically relate to this point in history in the 1870s when we think this item was made. Indigenous people in California having had that 100 years of contact with white folks at that point, do you think that the crosses are an unmistakable reference to Christianity, or do you think that they could potentially refer to other more indigenous iconographies? I mean, for instance, I noticed like on the north wall here, like the broken cross there probably doesn't refer to the Nazi party.
Yeah, no, totally.
Right? But do you think that this does for sure at this point in history?
On this one, I mean, I don't really know. Like, in no way do I have special information about baskets. But seeing the cross on this one as opposed to the markators on the other one that I had shown, one is much more like a four directions it could be, because there's an evenness to each one. And this one, it feels very much like a cross. So it's hard to know. But it's kind of like with anything that's a primary document, like that's, once the maker's gone, like it's hard to know intentionality. And so you can just kind of infer a few stories.
Yeah, I was thinking about, whatever we see is what we're close to, or whatever we see is what we're surrounded by. If you're a farmer out in the woods and you would see a post, the fence post, or a telephone post, or one of those. And if you're seeing quite a bit of churches with crosses and all that, you kind of automatically insinuate that could be that. but we don't know. One of the questions I had was about going back to the water rights, and because you showed the part where in California, I saw Bakersfield and Fresno, which is in between, and that's where the Tule Indian Reservation is, and their water rights. How do they stand as opposed to down in the valley?
Well, I mean, the rights that the Tule River Reservation has is a little under 6,000 square feet acreage of water, or square acreage by foot, that they have for the amount that they have allotted. And they have sovereign rights over that. Although there's a little bit of contention because there's limited water in that area.